Hello, everyone. Sorry for being a little late tonight. But thank you all so much for being here, sharing the space. So I wanted to just continue talking a little bit about devotion, and then just do really a short practice that could be helpful for devotion. But just been really thinking about this quite a bit. It's more than love. Like, devotion is more than love. I think it's the trust, and maybe the love comes first and the trust, possibly, right? Possibly the love may come first. But being devoted to something or someone, we're all devoted. Like, we're all devoted to something. It may not be the best thing to be devoted to, but we're all devoted to our phones. We're very devoted to our phones. We're devoted to our technology. But then we have other people, right? Other people in our life that we're devoted to. And I think it's really helpful just to reflect on that energy of devotion. Like, what is that like, right? And sometimes devotion gets confused with attachment and fixation. Then we have to be careful with that, right? Because devotion itself, like authentic devotion, isn't about attachment. It's not about fixating on something or someone. That's fixation isn't spacious, right? Isn't like when I'm fixated on something, I'm trying to hold on really tightly to something. Like that's not liberating to me. But devotion is about space, is about allowing something to be present and knowing that I can have a relationship to whatever is happening within the spaciousness. And I don't have to engage in the anxiety, the fear, the terror of trying to hold on to something, thinking that it's going to go away, it's going to slip away. A lot of people get devoted to me, and a lot of that devotion feels really suffocating to me. And I've had these conversations, and kind of tension with students who are just super devoted. They want to they kind of want to be the object of my attention, or they want to get me things, and they want to buy things. They want to be around me, and that kind of devotion feels like control, actually, and it also feels like fixation. Because we have to allow the teacher to have room and space and to be themselves. But ultimately, the best teachers are just reflecting back to you the work that you need to do. So the devotion, ultimately, that I'm looking for is a commitment to your practice. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't want to. I love supporting my teachers. I love offering what I can to my teachers, and I love offering. I love, whatever I have. I just want to offer it. I want to give it to my teachers because I am deeply moved by what they're offering me to get free. And I also have to be really spacious around knowing that my teachers aren't these mystical Well, I have to be clear. My physical teachers, my physical human teachers in this world, they're not like these mystical, um, non-human beings necessarily, but they're just like they're human, and that's the thing. They're human, so they have needs and desires, right? And things that I can't fulfill in this role of a student. Um, and so I have to learn how to offer what's appropriate. So, like, for me, it's like instead of just like giving things because I just feel moved to give it, I communicate with my teachers and ask, what do you need? Like, what do you need? When the teacher tells you what they need, then you honor that. Sometimes the teacher says, no, I don't need anything. It's thank you. I don't need anything. With my, with teachers, I saw this when I lived in the monastery with Rinpoche. I see this now with, one of my main teachers, Swami Jayadevi, who just lives across the street from me, actually, literally across the street. Our front porches face each other. Even with her, like sometimes, people give her things all the time, like flowers and chocolate and, different things like that. And she'll just redistribute that in the community. So I'll get some, right? Um, I'll get, some, a few flowers, from something that she was given, or a few pieces of chocolate, or, some sweets, something that was given to her and offered, and she distributes it. And I think that is like a really beautiful thing, that to say I'm offering this to the teacher, and then to allow the teacher to offer it out to the world, to others. I think it's just like a really beautiful thing to see, And I've given things to Swami before that I've seen other people with. Like, she's given the thing to someone else, and it's been cool. Like, I haven't had a problem with it. Partially, I haven't had a problem with it because it's easier for me to get it back and have it for myself. Anyhow, that's a whole other thing. Sometimes our devotion comes out of this desperation, and that desperation, that clinginess, that desperation is something that's happening in other parts of our life as well. To allow the teacher to have room to breathe, to be. My devotion is about allowing the teacher to be themselves, to be human, to have the space they need to move through whatever they need to move through. The teacher within this context isn't there to save us from our lives. I wish, like like the teacher doesn't wave a wand, right? They just don't pick up a wand and say, okay, I'm going to extinguish all of your suffering, all your bad karma. You're going to be free, right? That's not the reality, but the teacher can show up to give us medicine, right? To give us the medicine for us to take on our own that can begin to decrease the suffering that we experience. But we have to take the medicine. And sometimes that medicine doesn't come with a spoonful of sugar. Sometimes that medicine is hard to swallow. It's bitter. It's jagged. It burns our throat as we take it in. It's hard medicine. Like, the best medicine, the best teachings are the really hard teachings. It's the really bitter medicine, because that it's speaking to something. It's pointing towards something that we are running away from. And so we're being turned back into relationship to that thing that we're running away from. The kindness of the teacher, like the realization of how hard a real teacher, a real authentic teacher is working to get you free. You may not see that work. Like, it's not this manual labor, and like in a capitalistic context that we're surviving, it's like we're valued by what we produce, and what we produce has to be seen, right? It has to be wealth, it has to be material, it has to be things that we can see and say, oh, that's how you've produced all these things that we can see and touch and relate to, and that directly corresponds to how worthy you are within this cultural context. The labor of the spiritual teacher is labor that is unseen. It is labor that is hard to value through capitalistic norms, through materialistic norms, right? It's hard to value a teaching because that teaching is going to be different for us depending on who and what we are. But one teaching can take us to liberation, and that's invaluable. What I know from my teachings, teachers both living and passed on, is that they are always praying, always working in ways that like I cannot fathom and I cannot imagine. Right? That a realized awakened teacher has this ability to function on multiple levels at once, multiple levels of consciousness, multiple levels of awakening at once, right? And that they're also able to work with other beings who can be impactful and beneficial for us as well. So when when something's going on for me and I talk to Swami, when I see her outside on the street, on the sidewalk, I'm like, I need you to pray for me, right? She's like, the only thing that I can do is give it to the mother. I can offer this to the mother. She's often talking about Kali. When I talk about the mother, I'm often talking about Tara. But the mother in general, like the only thing I can do is ask the mother to move, to create the change that you're wanting to see. That's what I can do. But it's the teacher's connection to those higher levels of consciousness, that higher level of energy that makes this difference. Like it's the teacher's devotion to their own wisdom mind, or their connection, their realization of their own inherent wisdom and sacredness and divinity, that makes their prayers so powerful, because they believe in the things that we're struggling to believe in. That devotion is a doorway into the heart of these expressions of the mother, or of the divine, of God. And I'm like so moved, so deeply moved by expressions of devotion. I'm just talking about the really basic expression of devotion. It's not about, it's particularly devotion to the divine, right, to the sacred. Like, I'm moved by those expressions, particularly when those expressions are liberatory and spacious, not fundamental or contracting or rigid. But when I am leaning into the divine, and I'm also wanting to expand, to experience fluidity and openness and spaciousness, not this narrowness, I want the world to be shaped in spaciousness and fluidity and choice, not to be shaped in my narrow understanding of how people should be. When I pray for people, I pray for people to be free from harm, to be free from suffering, to be safe, to have what they need. That's my basic prayer, for everyone to have what they need, not for people to be just like me, or for people to be, to be fearful or shameful like me, When people come, people, for some of us, we've had these experiences with people and other traditions, maybe even Buddhism, have come up to us and they're like, oh, or I'll just say this, that's a bad example. When I was growing up, people were like, well, we're going to pray for you to be straight and to have a normal life. Those prayers are not in alignment with the truth of your liberation. I'm not saying that people can't pray to beings that can create obstacles for you. Like, that absolutely happens, right? There's lots of many stories, many things around that kind of devotion to the darkness, to the malevolence, to the harmful, And there are definitely people who may or may not be offering those prayers for us to experience harm. I know they're offering prayers for me to experience harm. That's just kind of the reality of things, And also the other reality is that I have a tremendous amount of protection as well because of my proximity to the mother, because of the ways in which I'm held by my teachers, because of my personal commitment to truth and liberation and compassion and love. Those are the things that protect me from the harm that people on the other side are doing, because this is a time of spiritual warfare. There's lots of warfare happening. Again, things that you don't see or recognize, but that there are things that are happening. There's a dark side, right? And there's a light side, and those sides are very busy right now. But yeah, going back to prayer, but I was, just saying just a second ago, growing up and people were like, oh, I'm praying for you. And those prayers were coming out of their wanting to see me conform, to be like them, to do something that feels safe for them. And that could never hold up to my deep desire. And it couldn't hold up to my karma to become what I needed to become, to be of benefit to people, right? And my prayers become stronger because of that alignment with the truth of things. The more you're aligned with that truth, the more powerful prayer becomes. And the more powerful devotion becomes as well. And again, so devotion is about freedom, it's about openness, it's about space. It's not about necessarily being saved. It's not about being enabled. It's not about having, entering into this caretaking relationship. It's about being held within spaciousness. And that being held in spaciousness can seem really alarming. Like, we think that when we pray, we want to feel smothered and held, and but sometimes, all of the real prayers, when prayer is really answered, it feels like complete freedom and space, and that's disarming because we have this space, but that space is precious because that's how the mother arises around us, is through that space. And you can be devoted and also be critical. One could say that, like, I've built a reputation on that, right? I love my lineage, and I'm in several lineages. I love all my lineages. My core lineage, of course, is Kagyu. Kaku school, right? And I'm extremely critical. I'm extremely critical of what happens in the lineage. I'm publicly critical. I'm critical in private spaces, but that doesn't mean I don't love the lineage. It doesn't mean that I don't embrace the power of the lineage. It doesn't mean that I'm not grateful for the lineage, because all that's true. And I can love the lineage and also be really clear about the harm that's happening. And it's both together. I can love my teachers and I can see them as human. I think sometimes we come and divide around the teachings, and we have to, of course, the teachings get really stark. When you start reading, Tsongkhapa, who was a Tibetan teacher who wrote a lot about devotion, maybe a couple hundred years ago. You even read someone like Tsongkhapa, right? And those teachings are very stark. It's like, oh, the teacher is the Buddha, is enlightened. That may very well be the case. The teacher may very well be enlightened, as I believe my root teacher, Nolan Rinpoche, was, and then Seren Wangdi Rinpoche. And at the same time, they're human and functioning within a human body, so they're inevitably going to make mistakes, because that is the nature of the physical within the relative, no matter how awakened you are. It takes a lot of spiritual maturity to not get swept up in the rhetoric around what enlightened beings should and shouldn't look like, and how we should be in relationship to enlightened beings. And it's all, I know for some of you who are really new to this, like, this is all really sounds very abstract and sounds like very out there. And it is because it takes years of metabolizing and being in these relationships. And, I know many of you haven't had these experiences of moving through an orthodox religion. Bhumisparsha is not orthodox, right? On purpose. But, and even with Justin moved through a really orthodox experience. Like, we had different experiences, but both of them were super orthodox. We were just two different orthodox experiences. But, he lived with Tibetans. He lived in India, with Tibetans, with his teachers. He was immersed in culture. Like, he was immersed in the practices, and, and I took the route of like monastery life and sitting long retreat, being trained by a Tibetan master. Both of those are both traditional routes within the lineage. But the issue with that is that there was no translation. Like, the translations I had to do to actually understand what those practices and experiences were, that was my own labor and effort. You were taught to teach like your Tibetan teachers taught. So even my colleagues, my friends that I kind of grew up in the lineage with, they're just kind of expressions of Tibetan teachers. And I was like, well, we're not Tibetan, and this isn't Tibet, and we're queer and, and Westerners and Americans and whatever, and we're of color and we're rich, we're poor, we're all these things within this kind of Western context, this American context here. And I just said, well, shouldn't we teach like Westerners? Shouldn't we teach like ourselves? And of course, that always got a whole bunch of pushback. But that doesn't mean I'm less devoted to the lineage, to my teachers. I'm allowing, and everything that I do is been validated by Rinpoche, by my root teacher, before he passed away anyway. So like every single thing that I'm doing, he gave me permission to do. He was like, do whatever you want. You're Black. He implied I was also messy as well. She was actually right. You're all these things. Go and do whatever you need to do. I'm not Black. He told me that in his exact words. I'm not Black. It's just you kind of get to this space where you're always connected to the love of the teacher. And that's taken years for me to get to. And it's just work. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen next year, possibly. Maybe it'll happen next year, but I doubt it. It may not happen in 10 years. I mean, I'm almost 20 years into this. I'm just really sitting in this perpetual love for my teachers, because the work has been about allowing myself to be loved and to love myself. That's where the core of the practice is. I've had to do the hard work of learning how to love myself, right? To love my messiness and trashiness and my fatness, my queerness, my humanness. What bothers me also is when we lose agency in this devotion practice. Like, it's not about losing agency. It's about being reminded of your agency, because you need your agency to get free. Because again, Jesus may have died for our sins, but strangely enough, we're still stuck in our bullshit. So that has helped me to understand that maybe I need to be diligent and to make choices of how to get free. How to get free, how to get woke, how to transcend the binaries and the dualism. Are there any questions? I know I haven't been allowing time for a lot of questions. Is there any questions before I continue? Anybody have any questions? In the Crowdcast universe. In the Crowdcast universe, are there any questions out there? Dharma After Dark. Yes. And it's okay. I'll say this too. It's okay to be moved by the teachers, to think about the teachers. Like I was saying last week, it's like when you're really devoted to a teacher and a lineage, like you walk into people's houses, right? And it's just like wall-to-wall pictures of teachers, and all kinds of stuff. And that's for me too. It's like, we carry pictures of our teachers in our wallets or our phones. I actually love that, when people are like, their screen, they're off screen on their phone. It's like, the home screen is like their picture of the teachers. I have pictures of my teachers everywhere, statues. So there's a question. How does one, I know I see it ask a question too. Okay, let me get to that. How does one connect with a teacher that has passed? that almost makes me want to do a practice with you. Let's see. I'm gonna come. Let me come back to that question, Jen. I want to actually just do a practice around that. You know, how do we connect to a teacher that's passed? I'm just going to quickly answer the question in the question box here. I related to what you said about how devotion can be clingy, and I related this to patterns with partners. Yeah. Yes. It's a really good observation. Any suggestions on how to heal from insecurity? From insecure attachment. I mean, it's that, so that attachment to partners or to teachers, there's a real similarity between those energies. And I think it comes from, as you say, it's insecure. So you actually have to turn your attention back to what you're trying to tend to, I guess, or heal. Like that insecurity, it comes from something that needs to be taken care of. So what needs to be taken care of? When we get into these really super attached and dysfunctional relationships with other people, it's like, yeah, it's a way that we're bypassing something that needs to happen for ourselves. It's something that is going untended to, but we're using relationships with others to feed that. And it should be the other way around initially, especially to learn how to move inward in order to start holding space for the thing that needs to be tended to, insecurity. You know, how do you find devotion for the teacher who caused harm? That takes years of practice, right? And for me, I'm so gassy that I don't know where that's coming from. So when you read chapter 8, the love and rage, right? Me Too and the Guru. I wanted to talk about that. I was like, how do you do that? You know, and I think again, just like in the former question, it's like I have to tend to myself. I need to take care of myself before I try to force devotion to happen for a teacher that's created harm. And I had to do that for myself. And of course I did it publicly, so it became public work, for which created some really exciting public Dharma talks. The center of that, the masterpiece of a period I was going through when I was doing that public, whatever I was doing to make sense of everything. I gave this talk at Naropa University, Naropa in Boulder. They still like me. And it was right after my teacher had died. I was just really pissed off at everyone. I was pissed off at the lineage. I was pissed off at Rinpoche. It was right before Shambhala, everything with the Sunshine Report started disclosing. And it was just like a week or two. I think 2 weeks before the Sunshine Report, the first report came out. That's the second. The second one is when all the shit fell apart. It was later that year, but the first report, right before the first report came out, and I gave this talk. It was 400 people. Just really processing a lot. It's online. It's on YouTube as well. You can search YouTube, Lama Rod, Naropa. And I have two, one on happiness and the other one on love and rage. That was well before the book too. It was before I started writing the book. You tend to the hurts. You tend to the pain, right? You take care of yourself, and then you reflect on the humanity of the teacher. You reflect on there's a human quality. And I'm not saying that the human quality is always bad and violent. I'm just saying within the expression of humanity, there's always, the potential for harm. I think when teachers achieve enlightenment, there's a choice that has to be made. And that choice is about having to stay in proximity in relationship to humanity. Because if you're not in relationship to that shadow humanity stuff, then you are no longer accessible. Like you're just off. You're just off in the emptiness, right? And no one can relate to you. No one can, like, people will be like, what is this? Who is this person? You know? The Buddha, if you study the life of the Buddha had to make that a similar decision to come back to the world, to be human, But that relationship to humanity is always going to be, not always, but it can be often in contradiction to the enlightened qualities of the teacher. The humanity disappoints us. And I'm going to say this, and then we're going to do a short practice to close out tonight. But to talk about connecting to teachers. But like so when I started practicing, I started with Surya Das. I'm going to bypass the commentary on him. And after Surya, the song that I started with was the Dzogchen Foundation. That was a Nima group, and Surya Das. Back then, Surya Das was like a big deal. Back in like the late 90s and going into the 2000s, Surya Das was like huge. He had written Awakening the Sleeping Buddha, The Buddha Within, or something. It was like a bestseller. He had a couple bestsellers, and he was like, and the Dalai Lama had called him the People's Lama. Right, the People's Lama, right? Anyway, no commentary. And so in that song was a whole bunch of teachers. One of them was Lama John McCransky, who was one of my teachers, who taught me benefactor practice. And another one of my teachers was Lama Willow Miller, and who started the Natural Dharma Fellowship. I was with the Natural Dharma Fellowship for a couple of years as a head, one of the main teachers, and I left. But anyway, I started, studying with Lama Willow really closely, because I had never met anyone so. Surya Das was just really inaccessible. Like he was just this god that walked around, and like he would have celebrities at retreats and everything. So he was like this superstar, celebrity Lama, but Willa, Lama Willa was very accessible, and it's I couldn't say this back then. I didn't know how to say this back then, but I just felt the mother Natara radiating from her, and I just chose to study closely with her. And then it went, we had formal connections, then we started having informal connections. That meant like I was around her where she wasn't teaching. So I was around her, when she was being a human in the world. And I remember how hard it was to do that. So I was like, oh, you're human. You're not a deity. You're not this goddess. That's disappointing. And then over time I realized, I'm the issue, because this is a human who expresses this incredible wisdom, but it's still a human. And so she gets to be human. She gets to make mistakes. Like she gets to eat, right? She gets to take a shit, right? She gets to talk about other things besides Dharma. That's part of it. And I had to work through that. I was like, oh yeah, teachers are human, right? And of course that's one part of humanity, right? It's just mundane humanity. Then the other part of humanity is it is the harm. It is the lack of wisdom that creates violence. I mean, we can be very critical about that. It's like, I love you, and I think your Dharma mind is really great, but you're not being skillful here, so therefore I have to make a decision on how I choose to relate to you. This is why I left the monastery. That's why I disconnected from the monastery. I don't think the community was skillful in working with abuse and harm, you know? But going back to the question, yeah, it just takes years of working and being honest about where we're at and what we're working through. You know, it's important to say, yeah, this is fucked up, and to show up to that, yeah, it is fucked up. You know, and this is always going to be the risk, right? And this is why we're working on in Bhumisparsha. I know some of you are part of the ethics circle. You know, we're trying to create these ethics. We're trying to develop a system of ethics that guide our time and our teachings, you know, in our community. Like, who are we? What are we? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? How do we hold people accountable? You know, how do we think about justice? Not just for the community, how do we relate to justice in the world? How do we reduce harm and violence? And knowing that at the same time, we're going to make mistakes. Like, I'm going to make mistakes. I make plenty of mistakes all the time. And sometimes I will say and do things on purpose, you know, for a very real purpose that may sound like a mistake, but I do it anyway. You know? So, anywho, I'm going to close out our time with this practice. So, Jen asked, how does one connect with a teacher that's passed? And so I just want to teach us a really simple practice. It's not terribly complex, you know, but it's just an opening our minds. So let's begin. Just get comfortable, or just get, you know, I don't like to use the word comfortable. Just get into a position that feels appropriate. Stay really informal and casual. So don't do anything. Just continue to sit the way you've been sitting. You know, just noticing, connecting to the earth under us, or connecting to the seat. Noticing the weight of the body. Noticing the experience of gravity holding our bodies. If you can, turning your attention to the breath, noticing the in-breath and the out-breath. Allowing the breath to really slow down. So taking your time to inhale, nice deep inhale, a nice long exhale. And do what we call a Ujjayi breath in yoga. So making a soft H sound as you inhale and exhale. Just a few more breaths like that. One more breath. Coming back into a normal breath. And so, taking a step further, now you can use a teacher that's passed on, or a teacher maybe in this life that's still alive. Both of those are fine, right? So either or. I want you and I invite you to start reflecting on that teacher, whoever that teacher is, either living or passed on. Bringing that teacher to mind. And I invite you to imagine that this teacher appears somehow above your head. Sometimes in teachings, we have visualizations of the teacher sitting on the crown of our head, but imagine the teacher's kind of sitting maybe 2 feet above your head. And now imagine that the teacher begins to radiate to glow with this soft white light. And this radiation, this light, is an expression of their enlightened mind, their compassion, their wisdom, their love, their equanimity. All that manifesting as radiance in the form of white light, beginning to radiate from their bodies. And the sphere of that radiation, or the area of that radiation, begins to get wider and wider. And that light begins to encompass us. And soon we begin to imagine that we too are being held within the glow of this teacher's enlightened mind. And in this radiance, imagine that our mind begins to merge with the mind of the teacher, or that our minds begins to glow with the same light from the teacher's own awakened mind. And just sit and allow yourself to be held by the awakened mind of this teacher. Not thinking about anything, but just resting within this spaciousness, this openness, and the emptiness of self. So we'll begin to transition out of the practice. So we'll begin by imagining that the teacher above our heads begins to dissolve into white light. That white light is absorbed down into the top of our heads and comes down, and our heart chakra, our heart center absorbs that white light, that energy. And turning our attention back to the seat, noticing the weight of the body, making contact with the seat, resting, grounding ourselves. Maybe moving through a few cleansing breaths. One more time. Okay. And then just awaken the body through some simple movements, just shaking it off, stretching, 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 stretching. Strike a pose, vogue, and come back. All right, precious friends. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Next week, we have Rashid Hughes joining us. And chances are we're going to start on time next week. Hooray. I know we all love that. I love starting on time. And then I'll be back to join you the week afterwards. Right, and I'll see you all soon with some capacity. All right, please be well. Take care of yourself. All right, folks. See ya.